Everyone in the kingdom feared the Alpha King's anger, but no one expected an Omega girl to look him in the eyes and say, "Easy boy." The grand halls of Silvermoon Palace had never been so silent. Hundreds of nobles stood frozen beneath the golden chandeliers, watching the most powerful werewolf ruler in the kingdom struggle to contain the weight of his own responsibilities. King Alpha Adrian William Blackthorn was known for his sharp decisions, his commanding presence, and the distance he kept from everyone around him. When the Alpha King entered a room, conversations stopped. When he spoke, everyone listened. But tonight, beneath the cold winter lights of the royal celebration, something was different. Adrian was not standing like a fearless ruler. He was standing like a man exhausted from carrying a burden no one else could see. Emily Grace Parker had no idea who he was. She had arrived at the palace as a simple Omega from a small border town, invited only because she had helped prepare supplies for the winter festival. She was not part of the royal families. She had no powerful connections. She had no reason to believe that one unexpected sentence would change her entire future. Emily only noticed what everyone else ignored. The man standing before her looked less like a king, and more like someone who desperately needed a moment of peace. When she saw his tense expression and the silence surrounding him, her instinct was not to bow lower or step away. It was to speak. "Easy boy," she said softly, almost without thinking. The moment the words left her mouth, Emily realized what she had done. The room became completely quiet. Several nobles looked at her with disbelief. Nobody spoke to the Alpha King that way. Nobody dared to treat him like an ordinary person. Emily's heart raced as she finally understood that the stranger she had addressed so casually was actually Adrian Blackthorn, the ruler of Silvermoon. She expected anger. She expected punishment. She expected the cold authority everyone feared. But instead, Adrian looked at her with surprise. Then slowly, a small smile appeared on his face. It was the first genuine reaction anyone had seen from him. That evening. "You are not afraid of me?" he asked. Emily lowered her gaze for a moment, embarrassed by her mistake, but then she answered honestly, "I was not trying to disrespect you. I just thought you looked like someone who needed to breathe." Those words reached him differently than any formal speech from his advisors. Everyone else saw the crown. Everyone else saw the power. But this Omega girl had seen the person underneath. Adrian had spent years surrounded by people who carefully chose every word because of his title. Emily was the first person in a long time who spoke because she genuinely cared. He did not understand why her simple honesty interested him so much. He only knew that the moment she walked away, the grand palace suddenly felt quieter than before. And for the first time in years, the Alpha King found himself wondering about the one Omega who was not afraid of him. Emily Grace Parker spent the entire journey back to her small village wondering if she had truly spoken to the Alpha King that way. The memory of the grand hall, the shocked expressions of the nobles, and Adrian William Blackthorn's unexpected smile replayed in her mind again and again. She had not intended to create a scene. She had not intended to stand out. Emily had always lived quietly, believing that kindness mattered more than attention. Yet somehow, a few simple words had placed her directly in the path of the most powerful werewolf leader in Silvermoon. When she returned home, she expected the memory to fade. She expected the palace to return to its world, and her village to return to its own. But Adrian could not forget her. For years, people had approached him carefully. They measured every sentence, every expression, and every action because they feared making a mistake in front of the Alpha King. But Emily had done the opposite. She had seen his exhaustion before she saw his crown. She had spoken to him like a person before she understood his position. Adrian found himself remembering the sincerity in her voice, and the way she looked at him without fear or hidden intentions. For the first time in a long while, someone had reminded him that he was more than a title. Several days later, Adrian found an unexpected reason to visit the outer villages of Silvermoon. Officially, it was to review the conditions of the border communities after the winter season. But deep down, he knew there was another reason. He wanted to see the Omega who had changed the atmosphere of a room simply by being honest. When Adrian arrived, Emily was helping organize supplies for families preparing for the colder weeks ahead. She immediately noticed his presence and froze for a moment. This time she knew exactly who he was. Your Majesty, she said, offering a respectful greeting. Adrian noticed the change immediately. The confident voice that had called him easy boy was now careful and formal. You do not have to speak to me differently because you know my name, he said. Emily looked surprised. But you are the Alpha King. Adrian smiled slightly. And you are still the person who reminded me to breathe. That answer made Emily relax. She realized that beneath the royal title, he was still the same person she had met at the festival. As they walked through the village, Adrian observed how naturally Emily cared for others. She helped without expecting recognition. She listened without judging. She treated everyone with the same respect, whether they were villagers or members of the royal court. Adrian had met many people who wanted something from him, but Emily seemed to want nothing except to see people treated fairly. Why are you always helping others? He asked. Emily thought for a moment before answering. Because everyone carries something others cannot see. The words stayed with Adrian. He understood them more than she realized. The entire kingdom saw him as strong, but almost no one asked what he carried inside. Their conversation continued as the afternoon light covered the village in gold. For the first time, Adrian felt no pressure to act like a king. He could simply exist as himself. And Emily slowly realized something too. The Alpha King was not the cold ruler everyone described. He was someone who had spent years being respected but rarely understood. Neither of them knew what this unexpected connection would become, but both of them felt the same truth. Their meeting had not been an ordinary accident. After the unexpected meeting in the border village, Adrian William Blackthorne found himself thinking about Emily Grace Parker more often than he wanted to admit. The Alpha King had spent years training himself to focus only on duty, decisions, and the future of Silvermoon. His days were filled with endless meetings, reports, and expectations from those who depended on him. But now, between those responsibilities, a simple memory kept returning. A young Omega standing in a crowded hall, looking directly at him and speaking with the honesty no one else had shown. Emily had not been impressed by his crown. She had not been interested in his power. She had simply noticed that he was tired. For someone who had spent most of his life being seen as a symbol rather than a person, that moment had become unforgettable. As the weeks passed, Adrian found more reasons to visit the border communities. Each time he arrived, he discovered another side of Emily. She was not trying to gain influence. She was not attempting to impress anyone. She was simply living according to the values she believed in. One afternoon, Adrian found her helping children from the village prepare decorations for a small community gathering. She laughed easily, listened patiently, and treated every person around her with the same warmth. The scene was completely different from the formal world of the palace, and Adrian realized something important. Emily carried a kind of strength that could not be measured by status or authority. You always seem to find something good in everyone, Adrian said as they walked through the village afterward. Emily smiled. Maybe because everyone has something good in them. Sometimes people just need someone to notice. Adrian looked away for a moment, thinking about how rarely anyone had offered him that same understanding. The kingdom respected him. They trusted his decisions. But respect was not the same as connection. Emily slowly became the one person who could speak to him without fear. However, their growing friendship did not go unnoticed. When Adrian returned to the palace, members of the royal court began asking questions. They wondered why the Alpha King continued visiting a simple Omega from the borderlands. They believed a ruler should surround himself with people who strengthened his political position. They did not understand why Adrian valued someone who had no royal background. Emily also became aware of the attention surrounding her. She knew the palace was a different world from the village where she had grown up. She knew some people would never understand why the Alpha King listened to her. But she refused to change herself just to satisfy others. She had never wanted a place beside Adrian because of his power. She only wanted to be honest with him. One evening, Adrian invited Emily to walk through the palace gardens. The contrast between them was impossible to ignore. He was the ruler of an entire kingdom. She was an Omega who had lived a quiet life far from royal traditions. Yet as they walked beneath the moonlight, those differences seemed less important. "Do you know what surprised me about you?" Adrian asked. Emily looked at him curiously. "What?" He answered. Everyone who meets me sees the Alpha King first. You were the only person who saw me before that. Emily was quiet for a moment before saying, maybe because everyone deserves to be seen that way. Those words stayed with Adrian long after their conversation ended. He had faced countless challenges as a leader, but none had changed him as much as the kindness of one Omega who was never afraid to treat him like an ordinary person. And somewhere between the quiet village paths and the royal gardens, something neither of them expected had begun to grow. The connection between Adrian William Blackthorne and Emily Grace Parker continued to grow quietly, but inside the walls of Silvermoon Palace, people had begun to notice. The Alpha King who once kept everyone at a careful distance was now spending time with an Omega who came from a simple border village. To many members of the royal court, the situation was difficult to understand. They had spent years believing that Adrian's future should be guided by tradition, influence, and powerful alliances. They expected him to choose someone who matched the image of a perfect queen. They never expected him to value someone because of her kindness. Emily felt the weight of those expectations the moment she entered the palace more often. The grand halls that once fascinated her now reminded her that she belonged to a world very different from her own. She noticed the quiet conversations that stopped when she walked by. She noticed the curious looks from nobles who wondered why the Alpha King cared about her opinion. But Emily refused to let those voices change who she was. She had never wanted Adrian's attention because he was a king. She had never dreamed of a royal life. The only reason she stayed near him was because she believed the person behind the crown deserved to be understood. Adrian noticed her hesitation one evening when they walked through the palace gardens. The winter air was cold, and the lights from the palace reflected across the snow-covered paths. "You have been quieter since coming here," he said. Emily looked at the distant palace windows before answering. "I am trying to understand where I fit." Adrian stopped walking and looked at her. "What makes you think you do not belong?" Emily smiled softly. "Because everyone here knows exactly who they are. They were born into this world. I was not." Adrian understood that feeling more than she realized. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who expected him to become a certain kind of ruler. They saw his position before they saw him. "Emily," he said, "you think belonging comes from where you started. But I think it comes from what you bring." His words stayed with her. For the first time since arriving at the palace, she felt that perhaps she did not need to prove she deserved to be there. She only needed to remain herself. However, the tension within the royal court continued to grow. During a council meeting, several nobles questioned Adrian's decision to seek Emily's perspective on matters affecting the kingdom. They believed an Omega without royal experience could not understand the responsibilities of leadership. Adrian listened calmly. He had heard similar opinions many times before. But this time, he did not remain silent. "The strength of a kingdom does not come from ignoring voices that are different from ours," he said. "It comes from understanding them." The room became quiet. Those words surprised many people because Adrian was not defending Emily as someone who needed protection. He was recognizing her as someone whose thoughts mattered. Emily later learned what he had said, and she realized something important about the Alpha King. Adrian was not simply trying to change the way others saw her. He was changing the way the entire kingdom understood strength. Their bond had started with an unexpected sentence in a crowded hall, but now it was becoming something much deeper. Emily had shown Adrian that power was not the only thing that made a leader. And Adrian was showing Emily that she never needed a crown to have value. Together, they were beginning to challenge a world that had always believed people should be judged by their position instead of their heart. The days following Adrian William Blackthorne's words to the Royal Council changed the atmosphere inside Silvermoon Palace. The Alpha King had always been known for his calm authority, but this time the people around him saw something different. He was no longer simply defending a decision. He was standing behind a belief that had slowly grown stronger since meeting Emily Grace Parker. He believed that a person's value could never be measured by their background, their title, or the expectations placed upon them. Emily noticed the change, but she also noticed something else. Adrian carried a responsibility that few people truly understood. Everyone admired the strength of the Alpha King, but almost no one asked how much that strength required from him every day. One evening, after a long meeting at the palace, Emily found Adrian standing alone near the grand balcony overlooking Silvermoon. The kingdom lights stretched across the valley, creating a beautiful view, but his expression remained thoughtful. "You look like you are carrying the entire kingdom again," Emily said gently. Adrian looked surprised. Most people would have asked if he needed anything. Few would have simply noticed. "Is it that obvious?" he asked. Emily smiled. "Only if someone is paying attention." Those words reminded him of the first night they met. Emily had always seen what others missed. Adrian leaned against the balcony and finally allowed himself to speak honestly. He told her that being the Alpha King meant always being prepared, always being responsible, and always appearing certain even when he had doubts. He had spent years believing that showing uncertainty would make others lose faith in him. Emily listened quietly. She did not interrupt. She did not try to give him a perfect answer. She simply allowed him to be heard. "Maybe being a strong leader does not mean you never need support," she said. "Maybe it means you understand when support matters." Adrian looked at her and realized how different her words were from the advice he usually received. Advisors spoke about strategy. Nobles spoke about reputation. Emily spoke about the person behind all of it. Meanwhile, Emily began to understand Adrian in a deeper way. The Alpha King who seemed untouchable was actually someone who had spent years putting everyone else first. His anger was not caused by arrogance. His distance was not caused by a lack of care. It came from the pressure of protecting a kingdom that depended on him. Their connection grew stronger because neither of them tried to change the other. Emily did not ask Adrian to stop being a leader. Adrian did not ask Emily to become someone from the royal world. They simply learned from each other. However, not everyone accepted the changes happening in Silvermoon. Some members of the court still believed tradition should decide the future. They quietly questioned whether an Omega from a small village could truly stand beside the Alpha King. Emily heard those doubts, but this time they did not hurt the same way. She had begun to understand that she did not need everyone's approval. The one person who mattered most already knew her worth. Adrian had not chosen to listen to her because she had power. He listened because she had honesty. And Emily had not stayed beside him because he was a king. She stayed because she saw the person he was trying so hard to protect. From the world. What began as an unexpected moment in a crowded hall was becoming something neither of them could ignore. The Alpha King had found the one Omega who was never afraid to remind him to breathe. The relationship between Adrian William Blackthorne and Emily Grace Parker continued to change the way they saw themselves and the world around them. For Adrian, every day beside Emily revealed something he had forgotten. The Alpha King had spent years believing that his role required him to remain distant, always controlled, always prepared. But Emily showed him that being understood did not make him weaker. It reminded him that even the strongest person could need someone who saw beyond appearances. For Emily, life inside Silvermoon Palace was still unfamiliar. The endless traditions, formal gatherings, and expectations of the royal court were very different from the quiet border village where she had grown up. But she no longer felt like someone who did not belong. She had begun to understand that her place was not determined by where she came from. It was determined by the kindness and honesty she carried with her. One morning, Adrian invited Emily to accompany him during a visit with the people of Silvermoon. He wanted her to see the kingdom beyond the palace walls, just as he wanted to understand the world she came from. As they traveled through the villages, Emily noticed how carefully Adrian listened to everyone. He remembered small details about families, asked thoughtful questions, and took every concern seriously. She realized that the man others described as intimidating was the same person who quietly cared about every corner of his kingdom. "You really remember everyone," Emily said as they walked through a small village square. Adrian looked at her with curiosity. "Why does that surprise you?" Emily smiled. "Because many people with power forget the names of ordinary people." Adrian became quiet for a moment. Her words reminded him why he had always carried his responsibilities so seriously. He never wanted to become a ruler who only saw numbers and reports. He wanted to protect real people with real lives. Later that day they sat near a peaceful field outside the village. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the landscape, creating a rare moment where Adrian did not feel surrounded by expectations. "Do you ever wish you had a simpler life?" Emily asked. Adrian considered the question carefully. Sometimes I wonder what it would feel like. But then I remember why I accepted this responsibility. Emily looked at him. Because of your people? He nodded. Because they deserve someone who cares. Emily smiled softly. Then maybe you are not as different from the person I thought you were. Adrian looked at her, remembering the first time she had spoken to him without knowing his identity. She had never been impressed by his title. She had always responded to the person beneath it. However, while Adrian and Emily grew closer, the pressure from the royal court continued. Some nobles believed the Alpha King was allowing personal feelings to influence important decisions. They worried that tradition was being replaced by something unfamiliar. When Emily learned about their concerns, she wondered if staying near Adrian created more difficulty for him. For the first time, she considered stepping away. She did not want to become a burden to the person who had shown her so much respect. But Adrian noticed the change in her expression and asked what was wrong. Emily admitted her fears, expecting him to understand. Instead, Adrian looked at her with quiet determination. You think you are making my life harder, he said. But the truth is, you are the reason I remember why my life matters. Those words stayed with Emily. She realized Adrian was not choosing her because he needed someone to save him. He valued her because she reminded him of the leader and the person he wanted to be. And as they stood together beneath the silver moon sky, both understood that their connection was no longer just an unexpected meeting. It had become a choice they were both willing to protect. The days following Adrian William Blackthorne's decision to stand openly beside Emily Grace Parker brought a quiet shift throughout Silvermoon. The change was not sudden, and it did not happen because everyone immediately accepted a new way of thinking. Instead, it happened through small moments that revealed the truth about both of them. The kingdom began to notice that the Alpha King was different when Emily was nearby. He listened more carefully. He considered ideas he might have once overlooked. He no longer carried every responsibility as if he had to face everything alone. Emily never asked Adrian to change for her. She never wanted him to become someone different. She simply reminded him that a great leader could still be compassionate, thoughtful, and human. One morning, Adrian invited Emily to attend a gathering with village representatives from across Silvermoon. He wanted her to see how decisions were made beyond the palace walls. At first, Emily hesitated. She knew many people still questioned why the Alpha King valued her opinion. She worried that her presence might create more attention than help. But Adrian looked at her calmly and said, "You are not there because people expect you to be perfect. You are there because you notice what others miss." Those words gave Emily the confidence to walk into the meeting without hiding who she was. Inside the grand chamber, leaders from different regions shared their concerns about the future of the kingdom. Many expected Adrian to speak first and make every decision himself. That was how previous rulers had governed. But instead, Adrian asked Emily what she thought. The room became quiet. Some people were surprised that the Alpha King wanted the perspective of an Omega from the borderlands. Emily did not speak as someone trying to prove her importance. She spoke as someone who understood the lives of ordinary people. She explained that every decision made inside the palace affected families, workers, and communities beyond those walls. She reminded everyone that a kingdom was not built only by leaders. It was built by the people who called it home. Adrian watched the reactions around the room. He saw something he had hoped for. People were beginning to understand why he respected her. Emily's strength was never about commanding attention. It was about helping others see what truly mattered. After the meeting, Adrian and Emily walked through the palace gardens. The evening air was calm, and the lights of Silvermoon reflected across the pathways. "You were nervous before the meeting," Adrian said. Emily smiled. "Was it that obvious?" "Only to someone paying attention," he replied. She laughed softly because it was the same kind of answer she would have given him. They had slowly become mirrors for each other. Emily helped Adrian notice his own emotions, and Adrian helped Emily see that she deserved to be heard. However, the royal court still had doubts. Some nobles believed that the old traditions of Silvermoon were being challenged too quickly. They worried that the kingdom was changing because of one unexpected connection. Emily understood their concerns, but she no longer allowed those opinions to define her. She had learned something important. Being accepted by everyone was impossible. Being true to herself was enough. Adrian had chosen to stand beside her not because she was powerful, but because she brought honesty into a world filled with expectations. And Emily had chosen to remain beside him not because he was an alpha king, but because she saw the person behind the title. Their story had started with a simple sentence spoken without fear. Now that same courage was helping an entire kingdom imagine a different future. The changes happening throughout Silvermoon were becoming impossible to ignore. What began as a simple connection between an Omega who spoke without fear and an Alpha King, who had forgotten what it felt like to be understood, had grown into something that affected the entire kingdom. Adrian William Blackthorne saw the difference every day. The people no longer only saw him as a distant ruler sitting above them. They saw a leader who listened, who cared, and who was willing to consider perspectives beyond the walls of the palace. Much of that change came from Emily Grace Parker, but Emily never believed she had done anything extraordinary. She simply continued being the same person she had always been. She helped when she could. She listened when others needed someone to understand them. She treated people with kindness because she believed everyone deserved respect. One afternoon, Adrian invited Emily to join him during a royal ceremony celebrating the unity of Silvermoon's communities. Emily felt nervous as she entered the grand hall. She remembered how different everything had felt when she first arrived. Back then, every corner of the palace reminded her that she was an outsider. Now she noticed something different. Some of the same people who once questioned her were beginning to greet her with genuine respect. Not because she had gained a title but because they had seen her actions. Adrian watched quietly as Emily spoke with villagers, nobles and palace workers with the same warmth. He realized that she had done what no advisor had managed to do. She had brought people together without asking for anything in return. Later that evening, Adrian and Emily stood on the palace balcony overlooking Silvermoon. The kingdom light stretched across the valley, creating a peaceful view beneath the evening sky. "Do you ever regret that first night?" Adrian asked with a small smile. Emily looked at him confused. "The night I embarrassed myself in front of the Alpha King?" Adrian laughed softly. "The night you were the only person who treated me normally." Emily smiled. "I did not know who you were." "That is exactly why it mattered," Adrian replied. Those words reminded them both of how everything had started. Before the crown, before the expectations, before the opinions of others. There was simply a conversation between two people. However, not everyone in Silvermoon had accepted the changes. Some members of the royal court still believed the kingdom was moving too far away from tradition. They questioned whether Adrian's choices were influenced too strongly by his connection with Emily. They believed a ruler should always follow the path that had been established before him. When Emily heard those concerns, she wondered if she had become the reason Adrian faced more challenges. She did not want her presence to create conflict for him. But Adrian understood her thoughts before she even spoke them. "You are thinking about leaving again," he said. Emily looked away quietly. "I do not want to make things harder for you." Adrian stepped closer and shook his head. "Emily, before I met you, I carried every difficulty alone. You did not create my burdens. You reminded me that I did not have to carry them by myself." Those words touched Emily because she understood the truth behind them. Their bond was never about one person saving the other. It was about two people who helped each other become stronger. Adrian needed someone who saw beyond his power. Emily needed someone who reminded her that her voice mattered. As Silvermoon moved toward a new future, the kingdom slowly began to understand what Adrian and Emily had already discovered. True strength was not found in being feared or admired. It was found in being known, respected, and accepted for who you truly were. The story of Adrian William Blackthorne and Emily Grace Parker began with a moment that no one in Silvermoon could have predicted. A simple sentence spoken by an Omega who did not know the identity of the man standing before her became the beginning of a connection that changed an entire kingdom. Emily never intended to challenge the Alpha King. She never wanted attention, power, or a place in the royal world. She simply saw someone who looked overwhelmed and reminded him that even the strongest person needed a moment to breathe. Over time, Adrian understood that those few words meant more than he first realized. Emily had given him something that years of responsibility and royal expectations had taken away. She had given him a place where he did not have to pretend. As the Alpha King of Silvermoon, Adrian was respected by everyone around him. His decisions shaped the future of the kingdom. His leadership protected countless lives. But behind the crown was a person who had spent years believing that carrying every burden alone was the only way to lead. Emily changed that belief. She showed him that trust was not a weakness. Compassion was not a weakness. Allowing others to stand beside him was not a weakness. It was another form of strength. Emily also changed through their journey. The Omega who once believed she did not belong in a world of royalty discovered that her value was never determined by her background. She did not need a powerful family name or a royal title to matter. Her kindness, honesty, and courage had always been her greatest strengths. Adrian did not choose her because she fit into an image created by tradition. He valued her because she reminded him of the kind of leader he truly wanted to become. The people of Silvermoon slowly accepted this new understanding. They saw that Emily did not seek influence for herself. She used every opportunity to help others. They saw that Adrian was not becoming less powerful because he listened to her. He was becoming a wiser and more connected ruler. Together they represented a different future for the kingdom, one where people were judged by their character rather than their position. One evening, Adrian and Emily returned to the palace garden where they had shared many conversations. The same place where they once walked as two people from different worlds now felt like a symbol of everything they had overcome. Adrian looked at Emily and smiled. "Do you remember when you first spoke to me?" Emily laughed softly. "I remember wishing I could disappear afterward." Adrian shook his head. "I remember thinking that you were the first person in years who treated me like I was more than a title." Emily looked at him and smiled. She understood then that their connection had never been about a king and an Omega. It had always been about two people who found understanding when they least expected it. Their story became a reminder throughout Silvermoon that true strength was not created by fear or distance. It was created through trust, kindness, and the courage to see beyond appearances. The Alpha King who once stood alone found someone who could see his heart before his crown. And the Omega who never believed she belonged discovered that sometimes the person who changes a kingdom is the one who simply chooses to remain true to herself.